Hola y bienvenidos. My name is Kristen, and this channel is dedicated to all things languages, culture, writing, travel, and student tips. So if you fall into any of those categories, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. And now let's get into my study abroad experience. So I studied abroad in Alcalá de Henares, Spain, which is a small historical and literary town about an hour away from the major city of Madrid, which is in the center of Spain. It is, like I said, a smaller city that's mainly full of students and an older generation. So you're going to be very immersed in the Spanish language and culture if you choose to study abroad in Alcalá de Henares, which I would highly recommend. All right, so here's some cool background information on Alcalá de Henares. It's not just a pretty historical Spanish city, it's actually the first planned university city in the world. Back in the early 16th century, Cardinal Cisneros designed it around the University of Alcalá, which became a model for other university towns in Europe and Latin America. Even today, it's still a huge student city, so there's always a fun and lively vibe. But Alcalá is probably most famous as the birthplace of Miguel de Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote.
She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment. Now come on now.
And you'll see references to him everywhere. His birthplace is now a museum, and there's a statue of Cervantes right in the Plaza de Cervantes. There's also a Don Quixote and Sancho Panza statue, which is a classic spot for photos. And walking around, you'll run into so much history. There are Roman ruins, the Corral de Comedias, which is one of Europe's oldest theaters, and something random but cool, Alcalá is known for its storks, or cigüeñas. You'll see huge stork nests on rooftops and bell towers all over the city, and it's sort of become a symbol of Alcalá. And I have to mention the tapas. Obviously, all of Spain is known for its tapas, but Alcalá is a great place for free tapas. Just order a drink and they'll bring you something to eat with it, so you can basically snack your way through the city without spending much. It's definitely a place where history, literature, and student life come all together, so it is definitely super underrated and 100% worth a visit. I said that studying abroad was always a dream for me, so when it came to picking where I was going to study abroad, the opportunity to study abroad in Alcalá de Henares came up through my school. So like many of you, I had no idea what this town was. I didn't even know it existed in Spain. My sister studied abroad in Barcelona, and that was somewhere that I was considering studying abroad. But as a Spanish major, I knew that I wanted to study somewhere that I could actually practice and acquire the Spanish language while I was learning about Spanish culture. So the University of Alcalá offered a program for North American students that worked directly in collaboration with my home university. So it actually allowed me to take Spanish classes that were taught by a professor from my university that flew with us all the way to Spain, taught one course, and also served as a guide for advice or recommendations. And it was really great because if you ever had any issue with, let's say you got sick, or maybe you had a problem going on with your homestay, you could contact this professor, and she really helped out with a lot of those issues that students might have been facing. So I chose to stay in a university residence in Alcalá de Henares, and the residence is called Lope de Vega, which he is also a very famous writer, which is just why the whole city is so iconic, because everything is dedicated to famous writers of the golden age of Spain, el siglo de oro. So that was really cool and iconic. So if you like writing, again, you should consider coming here. It actually has students from all over the world, so I made friends with students from Mexico, Iraq, Korea, Japan, and it was a really cool experience because I was getting to know these new cultures, but all of our common language was Spanish. So we were all practicing our Spanish with each other and learning about each other's cultures in a very new and exciting way. And one of the things that I found most interesting about my study abroad experience was all of the memories that I had in this residence. Now, a lot of people will argue that a homestay is better, and I definitely don't disagree with that. But do make sure to look into the residence options, because if you can go into a residence that's full of people from all over the world, or maybe students from Spain or whatever country you're in specifically, it might be better to be with younger people than to be with a family that might be older, or to be with kids who might be crying all the time. I definitely heard horror stories from students who had a homestay, so be sure to be careful about that. So I'm going to talk now about my packing and things that I would have packed differently if I could do it all over again. So I was studying abroad in Spain from January to April of 2023. Now in the Madrid area, it is super cold in the winter and super hot in the summer, which is actually very similar to where I'm from. So that wasn't really something I had to get used to, but it was definitely something I had to be prepared for. Now, the way that I packed was I packed 2 jackets. I packed one dressier, heavier jacket, and then I packed one lighter jacket. Now, if I could do it all over again, I probably would have packed one proper winter coat and then one lighter, dressier coat. But my dressy coat that I packed was actually the heaviest jacket that I had, and it actually kept me super warm. It was a very thick knit houndstooth jacket that I wore almost every single day in those colder months, and it made me look a lot more dressed up than I intended. And I guess that was a good thing because, as we know, in Europe, people tend to dress, I wouldn't even say more formal, they just dress like not in sweatpants and pajamas like they do here in the US. So that was definitely helpful when I was getting ready for class. I could just wear a pair of jeans, a sweater, and then that jacket, and then I looked like I was dressed to the nines. So again, I would pack one thicker, heavier coat or jacket and then one thinner jacket for when it starts to warm up. Another thing that I wish that I had done better with packing was packing in layers. So bringing more layerable items like maybe a thinner turtleneck or a thinner long sleeve shirt, some sweaters, some things that you can layer either to make yourself warmer or cooler. And that's something I didn't really do as much of. So definitely pack more layerable items. I think the one thing that people don't really wear in Spain, specifically in that area, was I didn't really see a lot of ripped jeans, but I did see some leggings. So I think if you can dress up leggings by maybe adding a longer pair of boots or just a long sweater, you're fine. And I styled leggings like they were dress pants so many times, so it's fine. We were actually put in a group chat with the other students who were from my college, so we were able to contact each other if we had any questions or if we just wanted to communicate, which is a great thing to have on the side. But I would highly recommend for you to go out of your way to make friends from that country. It will not only help with your social skills, but also your language skills. If you're in a Spanish-speaking country and you're learning Spanish or you're taking Spanish classes, you're really going to want to apply the things that you learn in that class to your everyday life, right? So specifically using that new vocabulary in action and getting to know people. Maybe by going to coffee shops and starting a conversation. Maybe by going to the local library and chatting with a student from there. Alcalá de Henares is not somewhere that you could speak English even if you wanted to, because almost every single person that lived there spoke only Spanish. So for me, it was a lot easier to be pushed out of my comfort zone because literally nobody spoke English there. When I first arrived to this city, it was full culture shock. I mean, the cobblestone streets, it was very small, and I was just like, how am I going to be here for 4 months, to be honest? I was literally dragging my luggage on the cobblestone streets from the bus stop to the university residence where I was staying. So I remember I was walking through the cobblestone streets. I think it was like a 15-minute walk, but with my 2 luggages, because I had 2 luggages that were really heavy and my backpack. And no, it wasn't a backpack. My 2 luggages that were really heavy and my duffel bag that was also full of stuff. And no one was helping us. I was just dragging my luggages across the cobblestone, and it was really painful and really annoying. So that was one of my biggest memories when I first landed in Spain, was just having to drag my luggage across the cobblestone. I had quite a few experiences with culture shock in Spain, not many. I think one of the biggest culture shocks people could face is the language barrier. Even if you speak Spanish pretty okay, but you're not used to speaking it much at home, it's going to be a huge culture shock to go to a new country that doesn't speak any English, especially if you're in a smaller town. So that is definitely something to be wary of, and in order to prevent that huge culture shock, I would start practicing now with your Spanish and getting used to the idea that you're not going to be able to speak English much, if at all, when you're in this new country. I think my biggest culture shock, and one of the things I liked least about studying abroad in Spain, was the eating times. Now, every person has a different eating time in the US, as the US is full of many different cultures. But for me personally, I'm somebody who grew up eating dinner very early, so I would usually eat my lunch between 1 and 2, and then eat my dinner between 6 and 7. But in Spain, as I'm sure you know, dinner is eaten very, very late. So sometimes restaurants don't start opening until like 8:39, and people can start eating as late as 10, 10:30. And it is really a culture shock, and it's not something that I was very fond of when I came to Spain. And it's still not really something that I'm fond of, but that's just how the culture is, and it's something that you have to get used to. Now, if this is something you are really struggling with, if you are studying abroad in Spain, what I would recommend you do is go to the local grocery store, buy some things, some healthy snacks, some easy things to prepare in your dorm or wherever you're living, and just have those on deck in case you get hungry and everything is closed. Because when I first came to Spain, I was starving and literally everything was closed, so I just had to suck it up until 8 p.m. when restaurants would open. The same thing applies to the nightlife in Spain. Local Spaniards don't start going out until like 2, 3 a.m. and they don't come home until the early morning. And I noticed in my residence when students got home, they wouldn't even go home to nap. They would go home, wait till the morning, eat breakfast, and then go to class. And I was so shocked as to how they had any energy to do anything that day. Another culture shock I had was the customer service in Spain. I come from America, so the customer service in most areas is actually really great. And if you go to a restaurant, waiters are going to want to do their absolute best to make sure that they get a good tip, right? So they're going to constantly fill your glass with water. They're going to constantly ask you how you're doing, if the meal is okay. And that's something that I grew accustomed to being from the US. But when I went to Spain, it is the complete opposite. Contrary to the US, waiters and waitresses don't rely on tips as their main source of income in their job. So they don't really have to jump through hoops to get you to enjoy their service in order to receive a tip because their tip is already built in. There's times that I didn't have the most pleasant experience with waitresses or waiters, so that's definitely something to be prepared for. For me personally, I didn't experience much homesickness just because I was having such a great time in the city that I was staying. A couple of things you can do to prevent homesickness is make sure you're talking to family and friends frequently about your experience, whether you're having a good experience, and be sure to be honest if you're not really having a good experience, and be open about struggles that you're dealing with so that your family at home can really help you figure those things out and navigate life abroad. Also, if you're really struggling, there's people within the university you're studying at, or maybe a professor that can help you out and give you tips on how to navigate things. I would highly recommend doing your research ahead of time about Spain and its culture. Specifically, whatever city you're studying in, do a lot of research about the cultural norms for that city. Make sure you're doing your research before you go so that you don't do anything that's going to make you stick out like a sore thumb. Another thing is make sure you're doing everything in your power to try to speak Spanish with the locals. If you revert automatically to English to the locals and just expect them to understand, that comes across as very rude. And in fact, it is very rude because you're assuming that they speak your language when you're in a country that's not the language. So make sure you're trying your best to speak the language. And if anything, if you're really having any problems, just pull out Google Translate, but make sure you're approaching people in a way that's kind and respectful, just like you would want to be approach people in that way. Another tip I have is to make sure you set a travel budget and keep track of all the things you're spending. Make sure you're keeping track of things like food, school-related purchases, travel, going out, just so that you can be more mindful of what you're spending. So that just about covers it for today's video. If you would like to see more videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what you would like to see more of. Until next time, adios y nos vemos.